If you're tired of overgiving, of shrinking yourself to be chosen, of feeling like love, peace, or abundance is something you have to earn, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're just unpracticed in believing you matter. There is a way to live differently. And this is exactly why I created You Matter, an 8-week, soul deep course to help you remember your worth, reclaim your power, and rewrite every relationship in your life, starting with the one you have with yourself. Enrollment is now open. You can find more information on my website, www.lindsaymorlock.com. Come walk with me on this journey, and I'll show you how your worthiness was never up for debate. The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Guided Podcast. I am so excited to introduce you all this week to Dominique Ross. Dom is a fellow hand analyst, Reiki master, and herbalist, and the owner of Rooted Life Sanctuary. And so I am so excited for this conversation. We've rescheduled it a couple of times. And so now the timing has finally aligned and is right for us to dive in. So Dom, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, the question I always love to open with is share with the audience your awakening story and what led you to where you are right here, right now in this moment.
So I think where I like to start with awakening is that it's more of an unfolding. At least I think it is for most of us. I think there's few people who have that massive event in their life that sort of wakes them up. But mine was really about breadcrumbs or trail markers, many of which I didn't even know that's what they were to begin with. But the awakening story really starts, I think, with the birth of my second child. The precursor to that was my healing journey. And I think without the foundation of my healing journey, which started with the birth of my first child, who has been one of my greatest teachers, the awakening journey would not have been as easy, or it wasn't easy, but it wouldn't have come as easily, I think, or felt as intuitive as it was. So after I had my second child in 2019, I took an extended maternity leave and I decided to take an aromatherapy course, and I don't even remember what prompted it. My mother used essential oils when I was a child, but other than that, I don't even know how I found the school necessarily. And so I was engaging in something that I was interested in, and it felt nourishing and it gave me balance. And so when I started this class, I found that it really fed me in a very different way than anything had previously. And my career had been in public education, which I found very draining. So this was very exciting because I felt so inspired by what I was learning, like the magic of the plants and all of that. And it really woke something up inside of me. There was a thirst and a hunger that I had as a result of taking this class. And I feel like it primed me for what was coming next. And when I went back to work after about 9 months of maternity leave, I was brought to my knees. It was an experience where all of my wounds were activated and triggered by my work environment and by my colleagues, who at the time felt like enemies. And then after a lot of my spiritual work, very quickly felt like teachers. They were instrumental in that process. But every wound was poked. My codependence, I think, was at an all-time high. And my core wound was it was about as raw as it could be. And I was showing up in very wounded ways. And it was a series of small conversations and questions asked that led me to a retreat. So I had a massage therapist at the time who was very spiritually inclined, and we'd have some deep conversations. And she was wearing a necklace, and I said, "Oh, it's beautiful. What is that?" "Moldavite," she said. And she said, "It comes from the earth's, I can't remember what chakra she said. She said the earth's heart chakra or something along those lines. And I was like, the earth has chakras? I knew what chakras were, but I hadn't been able to conceptualize that the earth is also like a breathing body. But like I hadn't reached that stage in my spiritual development to really consider that. And I knew I needed work on my root chakra. I knew it. So I went home and I Googled map of the earth's chakras. And I found that the root chakra, although the chakras move on earth, the root chakra is actually Mount Shasta in California. And I thought, well, I can get to Mount Shasta. And so I had this image came in my head of flying out to California and going hiking on Mount Shasta. And I thought, no, like I'm the person that will get eaten by the bear, mauled by the mountain lion, like if I do this alone. So it's like, I wonder if there's any retreats. And I Googled spiritual retreats, Mount Shasta. And sure enough, there was one that was going to be happening. It was like 6 weeks later. I reached out to them. They had one spot left. They gave me the discounted price. It just all, as I've heard you talk about on other episodes, everything just fell into place. And it was so easy. It was like spirit was saying, yep, this is where we want you to go. We're going to make it really easy for you. And that was really the experience I had that opened me up to a different way of being. So I learned it was a meditation retreat, and I really hadn't spent a lot of time in meditation previously. I tried, but unsuccessful. And it just opened me up to people who were channeling and connected in all these different ways. I met Catherine Ann there, your resident astrologer, and she introduced me then to my soul sisters in my spiritual group and the spiritual mentor. So it really just the doors kept opening and I kept walking through those doors. And then the breadcrumbs became very obvious. I was like, oh, that's what a breadcrumb is. That's where the signposts are. And once I was aware, once that awareness comes, nobody can take that away from you. So it just compounds and miracles seem to happen more. And so that's really where it all started.
Thank you for sharing that. I can so resonate with the breadcrumbs because that was my journey as well. And I think so many of us do have this little trail. It's like we want the whole loaf of bread. Like, show me the future, show me what the loaf looks like, and then I'll decide if I want to follow the breadcrumb. But it rarely works like that. We just get the next right step. And I love how what you describe here is that you were just open and receptive to what you were learning, right? You went down the rabbit hole of let me Google a map of the earth's chakras. And then this one led to the next one. And I think so often it's these small actions that we take that starts to shift our path. And so do you find that to be true in your own journey? What are some of these first small actions that you feel like you've started to take that have a big impact?
I think about small actions in terms of what I started doing around that time of that awakening. And I can't remember if it was before or after the Mount Shasta retreat. I think it was probably after, but I started listening to Oprah's Super Soul Sunday podcasts. And actually I got there through a different podcast, I got to that podcast through a book. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting to ask that question because it feels like it's hard to pick out necessarily small actions because, again, it was all breadcrumbs, right? It was all a friend told me to read a book or listen to a podcast. So I did. And then I heard something that I researched. And I think those were the little things I was doing. It was just a commitment to follow my curiosity and to plug into what I had an emotional response to. I had a wonderful therapist, and she was actually very spiritually inclined. She is a Reiki practitioner and includes that as part of her work with clients. And I would bring things to her and we would process them together because at the time that's who I had who understood. And didn't think past lives were crazy or anything like that. She was my go-to. But it was the reading of books and it was the finding the nuggets of wisdom that helped me consider something differently, consider a perspective differently, look at a situation not from a what's wrong with me perspective, which is very shame-based. I think of Brene Brown. I read The Gifts of Imperfection. And that was a profound book. And I'll never forget reading about the shame spiral that you can get in and how witnessing it robs it of its power. And it was the first time I was able to really feel like I could hold on to a concept that would help me in my healing journey. And so I think those are the small actions. It's just the commitment to curiosity and letting that curiosity flow and paying attention. I think it's really about paying attention and being willing to lean into the discomfort because it wasn't always comfortable, right? Some of the things I was exploring were painful and I hadn't yet come to a place of forgiveness for myself around some of the choices I had made and exploring my parental relationships and all of that. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And I would love for you to take us a little bit deeper so that the audience can really resonate with pieces of your story. And you talk about the shame spiral, you talk about how, the birth of your second child like really opened you up. So is there anything that you're comfortable sharing that really helps people to connect with your personal story? And what are some of the things that you were needing to heal that have now shifted you in a very profound way for landing you where you are here today?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy sharing. I had mentioned that the birth of my first child was the start of my healing journey, and she's been my greatest teacher, which hasn't been easy for her. I remember when she was 3, she told me she picked us. She picked Daddy and I over this couple that lived in a high rise in a city. It was kind of very specific. And so I lean on that sometimes when I'm feeling like, oh boy, maybe she deserves better. No, she doesn't. Like she picked us, right? And I'm very rooted in that belief. But when she was born, I recognized a lot of my childhood experience and the home I grew up in. I grew up in a very emotionally volatile home, times a violent home. And that I did not realize what lived within me until I had her. And when I had her, I had this overwhelming love that I felt for her. And simultaneously, the not enoughness. There's something wrong with my BTMI, but I was breastfeeding and I could not keep like the breast milk, it would just drip everywhere. And I felt like I was like a milking cow. And there was something wrong with me for not being able to control like my body. She would cry. And it turned out she had a sensitivity to lactose, but I felt because I couldn't soothe her crying, there was something wrong with me. Like the core wound just kept coming back. And the overwhelm of new motherhood for me was what it really did was it triggered anger and it was like I was a yeller and I was a rager and that felt very uncomfortable and I recognized it instantaneously because that's what I grew up with. And I knew the minute it showed up, I remember saying to myself, I need help. I need help with this because at the time I wasn't in counseling and I very quickly got into counseling and I had a few different therapists over that time frame and then landed with one that therapists are like dating, right? You have to find one that's the right fit for you. And sometimes you have to go through some not so great ones to get to the right one. But so that was really what showed up for me there. Socially, it was exclusion. I'd been bullied as a kid. I moved from the US to the UK when I was 5. And so I always felt different. And so exclusion has shown up as a teacher for me over and over and over again. I've picked the wrong tribes to be a part of, that are not aligned and tried to make them work, which always feels like just square peg, round hole. And in some cases, it's been outright rejection. But now that I'm a hand analyst, I understand like all the lessons that my soul came here to learn, which that gave me a lot of peace around this isn't personal. My soul signed up for this. And actually, instrumentally, it has helped deepen my compassion for my parents because I recognize their role, particularly my dad. I recognize his role as a great teacher in my life and learning to find my voice and all of those things. So yeah, I hear quite frequently from people that have known me for a while that I'm a completely different person. And I say that with like a little asterisk, which is perfection is not the aim of the game. I'm far from that, right? Anybody listening to this who might just be starting their journey, like it's not, for me, I'm still a work in progress. We all are, right? This is the long game. So when I'm a different person, it just means that I'm not responding anymore from a trauma lens. I am not responding, like, I don't rage anymore at all. Like, I'm able to see my kids have meltdowns and I'm able to hold my inner child because I've done a lot of that inner child work. And I remember when my therapist first talked about an inner child, I was like, what is she talking about? What is an inner child? I don't know how you connect with this inner child. What is this business? And it was through the spiritual group that I connected with and some of the inner child advocates that I was able to really learn like what that means, what that looks like, how to connect. And that's been a game changer. But when I feel feelings now, I go inward, right? Like instead of looking to control things outside of me. And so when I hear people say, you're like a different person, I'm like, yeah, but it's been work and it's been the most beautiful work I can do because it's made me a better mother. I sometimes get a little sad because I know my first child, my oldest, had a very different mother than my second child has. And I'm seeing how they're developing in different ways. And some of that is who they are and what their soul has chosen. And I understand all of that. And also, there's that human side that wishes, like, oh, if I could have only given my oldest what my youngest has had, the mother that she has had. And yet, I know that the mother I was is somehow instrumental in my oldest's experience. It's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, there's so much good stuff. Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to go back quickly to what you shared about this journey of exclusion, right? And picking the wrong tribes and maybe finding yourself in relationships, feeling like you're attracting the same kinds of relationships over and over again, only to feel disappointed or let down or like you're not being treated the way that you deserve to be treated. And I think as you were speaking, the human condition, the basic human need that we all have is this desire for belonging. And I also have done similar inner child work to what you have done. And I think that is part of what we are doing when we are acknowledging, in psychological terms, they would call it parts work, right? These different parts of ourselves and remembering and bringing all of these, our inner teenager and our inner child and all of these different parts of ourselves back to a remembering that we are whole just as we are. And it's such powerful work to be able to understand how to allow your emotions to guide your healing process and allow them to be creating understanding around messages that spirit is trying to bring forth. Because ultimately, I think what we're all being led to is to find this sense of belonging within ourselves. Because when we feel safe and secure in ourselves, when we don't abandon ourselves, that's when we create this sense of safety and security within our own being. And I really believe that's the level of intimacy we're trying to create with ourselves. That's what creates belonging, is this genuine connection with our inner self. And so I love how you brought up the piece about being a hand analyst and your life lessons. And if you're comfortable sharing with people what that lesson is and how that translates, I would love for people to hear that, just to understand the power of what's in your hands and how it's actually showing up in this particular way in your life, and how it's also feeding the relationship that you have with your kids and your journey healing yourself, and how that's going to be a way shower for them as well, regardless of the type of parent you were for your older child versus your younger child, right?
Sure. So my life lessons, I got a doozy. And my oldest child too. We both have three life lessons. So I have powerlessness, guilt and worthlessness, and authority issues. And my authority issues really showed up like a lot in my 20s. I lost a number of jobs. So my own authority issues and our lessons don't, we can work on them, but they don't necessarily always go away. It's not like every now and then I have to check myself like, okay, this isn't dad, right? You're not engaging with your dad. It's okay. But it's that conversation with the inner child that I didn't have before. Powerlessness really showed up for me and not having a voice, not speaking my truth, and learning what speaking my truth meant has been a journey of itself, right? Like not everything actually has to be shared. That's on your mind. And I can have a tendency to be a little crusty with sometimes depending on the situation, like what I'm sharing. And so I have to be accountable to myself, but in a compassionate and gentle way. So holding those parts of myself instead of with judgment, but with like, oh, we could have done that better, Tom. Like that. And actually saying that out loud so my inner children can hear it. We could have probably done that better. Maybe we should repair that. Okay, let's say sorry. Let's let the other person know it wasn't them. There was something going on within us because oftentimes there is, right? But I'm still working through what it means to like stand in my power in certain situations. And you always talk about mirrors, and that was really instrumental for me to see how in this three-dimensional world, like the mirrors are showing up to teach me and show me where I am not standing in my power, either because of what I'm looking at or how I'm seeing a situation play out in front of me. So it's been about making sure I'm factoring myself into the equation. This has been a lot of boundary work. I had a friendship where I handed over a great deal of my power because I felt that I needed this friendship to be whole. And what I realized was that I was second fiddle. I was good for the difficult times, but not for the fun times. And I finally found my voice and was met with annihilation. And it was very painful to continue to stand to my power, but it felt really important because I needed to express what I needed to express. And I noticed my codependent parts would sneak in there and apologize almost excessively. But then I would stand back in my power and say, this is the boundary for me. If we're going to have a friendship, it needs to be more balanced than what it is. And that person wasn't able to see my perspective and wasn't able to see their part in it. And so, that friendship has changed and it's not what it once was. But that has actually left space in my life for all these other people to come in who are doing the work and actually understand what it is that I'm doing. And we can have difficult conversations and it's okay at the end. So I think the life lessons they're powerful because they've helped me get to this place of healership. They've been the foundation from which I have found greater purpose in my life. And they give me stories that can help people who are evolving. It's like an assembly line almost. I like the people that are getting their parts work done, like a little bit behind where I'm at. Maybe this is helpful for them. And that's the light that we bring.
Thank you for sharing that. As a fellow hand analyst, I just love looking at the life lessons because that was what was always most empowering for me too. My archetype, I have two different life lessons. One is guilt and self-worth. The other is trust, intimacy, and surrender. And the archetype between the two is worthiness in relationship. And so I so resonate with your journey of feeling like having this trail of relationships that just goes south and having to own that it's okay. I'm the common denominator somewhere in this equation equation of failed relationships. And so what is it about me, about how I'm showing up, about how maybe inauthentic I am actually being, right? Because we all are wearing masks that are covering up our wounding, right? And those masks keep us safe in our wounding. And so one of the things that I really love that you were starting to share about is the relationship of compassion and the relationship that we have with ourselves. I think compassion and really being willing to take responsibility for our stuff and for healing our wounding is what brings us back into a place of integrity. And to me, that's the place our power comes from. Our power comes from being in integrity and then having to recognize sometimes that speaking our truth leads to people leaving or people behaving poorly or people reacting in less than desirable ways, and having to just be with the reality of that experience and still having to stay in our truth and still having to hold our boundaries and knowing what's okay for us and what's not okay for us. And where I am going with this is, for me, forgiveness for myself, forgiveness with others has been a really important part of finding peace with myself, with others, especially when relationships don't necessarily go the way that we've hoped that they've gone. So can you talk to your own experience with forgiveness, and especially in relation to these relationships?
So before I talk about forgiveness, I actually wanted to respond to something you had said about being seen and authenticity, because I connected with a group of moms in my town, and something just always felt not quite right. And I knew that there was a part that was me. And I recognized after learning about it was codependence, right? It was trying to fit in where I didn't. And what I have learned is that you can't be seen by others until you start seeing yourself. And it is that relationship with self that is so important. And so I think that that continued to turn me inside. But I went through this long time dance of actually pulling away from the group, coming back to the group, pulling away from the group, coming back to the group. And I felt the dynamic change. I wasn't getting invites to things. Occasionally I would, but most often I wouldn't. And I had to find forgiveness for myself for that severing and coming back and severing and coming back, because that was the wounding. That was the feeling like, I need the space to figure this stuff out. And then I'd come back and it still didn't feel right. And then I'd leave again. And we talked about parts work. And I think that's critical, right? Is finding compassion for those versions of us, because we have infinite versions of us. Every moment of every day, a new version of us is created. And so the version of me that was responding, I had to really check in with her. She's 9 years old. Her name is Sophie. She's very wise. And she was very hurt by people, really wounded. And so holding her with compassion, of course, you felt like you needed to detach, but then come because you want friends. And when I grew up playing on my own. I had a sibling who was 8 years older. So I played on my own. We moved from the United States to the UK, and making friends was quite challenging at the time. Play dates were not really a thing. Sleepovers were not a thing. There weren't the neighborhoods that you see that in my child's mind, I would think about American TV and be like, I want to live in a neighborhood with lots of kids. And it just wasn't that way. And so as an adult, I'm learning how to play with community. And that has been my learning. But going back to your comment question about forgiveness. So forgiveness is grief work. Forgiveness is about grieving what we had hoped for, what we wished something would be that it never ended up being, what we did and didn't do, what they did and didn't do. And it's all the reason that the opposite of forgiveness is anger and resentment is because that grief has not been felt. It has not moved through us. That friend I was talking about, that was a big friendship in my life. And it felt like an enormous loss. And it was really challenging. And I kept finding myself, I'd be like, I'm at peace. And her name would come up and I'd have a reaction. And I'm like, you are not at peace. This is not what peace looks like or feels like, more importantly, right? There was a discord in my body. And I finally said to myself, you need to sit down. We need to sit down, my inner children and we need to work through this with spirit. And that's what we did. And now I'm at peace, right? But I needed to give self the space and time. And it was literally hours and it's not always that way, but this one was hours because this was a relationship with a lot of weight and importance in my life, where I did feel in many ways seen. But when I made mistakes, they were held on to, or they weren't met with compassion. And so that's what fractured the relationship. But I hold a lot of love for this person. We learned a lot. We grew a lot together. I'm still working on forgiveness for certain people in my life. My mother-in-law, for example, she won't listen to this, so I'm not worried if she hears it. But I'm still working on that because my greatest hope and wish in my life for myself, and when I think about, I want to feel at one. Like I want to feel, and I'm getting there, but I don't want to feel anger or resentment towards people. I lived so much of my life in that space, and I feel like I'm done with that. I don't want to feel that anymore, but in order not to feel that, I have to not be in resistance to it, and I need to let whatever flows flow. Otherwise, the anger remains, right? You have to address, okay, like, why am I still angry? And so that's another sort of grief session I need to really work on. And I did some grief work around my relationship with my sister, and that was profound work. And it was actually the Grief Recovery Method, which is a book, and it's a method for addressing unresolved grief of any sort, like loss of a job, identity, whatever it is. And you come up with a timeline of your life, and then you identify where the work is needed, and you pick one, and then you create another timeline, like what were the experiences of that particular relationship situation it was. And then you identify where like repair might be needed, right? You take accountability, but where you also feel like you need to be heard. And then it results in the writing of a letter that you actually read to a witness. And it doesn't have to be the person that, because that person may have passed away, or there may not be a relationship anymore. Or maybe there is a relationship, like with my father, and I don't necessarily want to read this to him. Like, this is not something I think it would be received well. You read it to a witness. And so that was some really profound work that has been done. But I do think that forgiveness for self and forgiveness for others is about really allowing the grief to flow.
Yeah. And I want to remind people, we don't do forgiveness work to condone the behavior of others. We do it to let go of the emotional baggage and burden that we're carrying around the things that happen. And so I so agree with you that it's profound work. And to your point, grief is rarely a one and done, especially with these big relationships that have deep and big impact in our life. And then there's a subsequent loss. We might have to revisit the forgiveness process several times, and giving people permission that like it's rarely one and done. And I know anyone who's gone through any kind of big grief, which, let's be honest, as a collective, loss, sacrifice, I think every single person in the world can identify with a feeling of some sort of loss, sacrifice. Even changes when they're positive create feelings of loss. Even if we're changing into a new expression of who we are, I feel like I've grieved the ego death, right? Even though I don't want that part of me anymore, you grieve it. And so I so appreciate you bringing this up, because I think it really normalizes how important it is to just allow ourselves to be with all of the feelings, be with all the anger, be with all the rage, be with all the grief, whatever that is, really be with all of it.
I think too, our society and our culture, particularly Western culture, does not do an adequate job of grief, like receiving grief, holding people in their grief. Like time will heal all wounds. Actually, it doesn't. For some, that loss, I had a friend in college who lost her father, and I think it's been nearly 10 years, and she's still grieving. Like she doesn't have a relationship in her life, a romantic relationship. Her father was her forever Valentine. That's how she refers to him. And that grief might be lifetime for her. And that's okay. Like our difficulty with grief as a culture is our discomfort with other people's feelings and just allowing somebody to be in their grief, to be in their sadness, to be in however they're feeling their grief, right? It's not always sadness. So I think the way we do that better as a culture is by doing it differently within ourselves. And then we can hold space. Like I no longer say to somebody who's grieving, I'm so sorry for your loss. I say, I feel sadness for your loss, or I'm holding you in your grief, or something along those lines. And I do see on social media all the responses when someone's lost a loved one or a pet, and people really don't know what to say. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm sorry for your loss. Like it's better than saying nothing. And also, it's not really reflective of how the empathy that we might have for that person. So yeah, anyway.
You're speaking to the principles of validation. Like, how do we validate people's right to feel whatever they feel? Because our feelings are always valid. And
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. Our discomfort with others' emotions is nothing more than a mirror of how uncomfortable people are in being with their own. And so that's why it is so important for people to learn how to be with their emotions, because they're not good, bad, right, or wrong. They're just intuitive messages from our soul, and they are our internal GPS. And so it really is important for us to lean into the emotions, because without leaning into them, we don't heal. We just get all clogged up. It was so funny yesterday. I was in the car with my sister, and I'm in Jersey, so we're a little predisposed to the road rage in these parts. But anyone who lives in New Jersey knows that we are having a massive infrastructure problem with sinkholes on Route 80, and it's really backing up traffic, and people here are really disgruntled about the traffic situation. And so there was someone yesterday who was not interested in letting me merge, but I merged anyway. And he sat there like showing his road rage to me in a number of different ways. And I just kept looking up being like, do you feel better now? Do you feel better about your emotions? Is this helping you process your emotions? And now it's almost a sarcastic form of judgment, I fully admit, because I was so uncomfortable, because some of the road rage actually makes me feel like I'm in danger, right? It's unpredictable. So that's how my feelings in the moment were masking it. And I had to remind myself, take a breath, process your fear that this guy is totally raging behind you.
Right.
Is he going to crash into me purposely? Right? He was playing around with some of those games that my sister and I were both wondering what's going on here. But I'm like, this is what happens when people literally clog themselves with emotions.
Yeah.
Like they project it onto others, and it's that simple. That's what road rage looks like. And so we're doing the same thing if we're not feeling our anger, if we're not feeling our grief. Like it is spilling out of us and being projected onto other people in other ways that don't make us feel good about ourselves, because it throws us out of integrity. And so I know processing my emotions has been an integral practice that has anchored me on my journey. I know I'm hearing you've done grief work. You've also done inner child work and parts work. Are there other spiritual practices that have anchored you through this journey?
Oh, yes. Yes. I could speak about what has anchored me, and I can speak about what has just entered into my life that I received very clearly the message, this is your new devotional. And I actually have it here. And it was breadcrumbs, like was out running errands. I was like, you're going to go to a bookstore for not any particular reason. I couldn't remember the name of the books that I was actually looking for. It's a bookstore that it's an independent bookstore, so it never often has what I'm looking for. And I was just walking around, and this book popped out. It's called The Freedom Transmissions, channeled by Carissa Schumacher. And she channels Yeshua, which is Jesus. But as the channel came through, it was, I'm Yeshua, I'm not Jesus, because Jesus is a very polarizing figure. And this, I know I'm reading this because Spirit put it in my path. And I've already cried a number of times reading it, and I'm not even, I'm on page 14. But, you know, there are practices, and I've been told this is a part of my practice, right? This is a part of my spiritual practice. There are things that have anchored me through this process. Meditation is part of that. I'm quite habit and routine resistant, so I'm still working on the daily meditation, but I know it's my trusted friend. Like, I know when I'm like, all right, come, we need to meditate. And I've also learned that meditation looks like different things. Like I have 3 cats, and I can meditate very easily by just loving on them and getting them to purr and just looking at their sweetness. And I just adore my cats. And so they are meditative to me. I was walking in the garden the other day, and I was like checking on which of my lovely plants have decided to return to me this year because we had a hard winter, and the nettles are popping and they're beautiful. And I planted rose rugosa, which looks like the beach roses. They're not the ones you see in the stores that are perfectly formed. They're the ones that are a little more floppy, and they're pink usually or white. And I make a rose glycerite from the petals of those, and they smell glorious. And I planted because I'm tired of driving an hour to the beach to go get them, although I love the beach, but it's a long way from me. And so I was like, I can plant them here in my own garden. And I planted them in the fall. And I really thought it was like, oof, that winter really got them. And nope, they're tiny and they're just coming. So watching my medicinal herbs and my garden unfold, like my veggie garden, like that's meditation for me. That is very anchoring for me. It makes winter quite difficult, to be honest, because they're like you have to be a little more creative. I think understanding, right, we've talked about hand analysis really keeps me anchored because I'm constantly reminded, like even when I do events and I really don't make the amount of money I want to make, the reaction of the people who get their hands read at an event is worth it. It's that spirit's peril, right? That's the moment when you're like, this, I just gifted this person valid. They've been seen in a way they've never seen before. And that anchors me because that modality it's such a beautiful gift, as any of the modalities are, right? And they all provide something different. So I think those are the ways I stay anchored. And this reading that I'm now doing is a new anchor that's been introduced to me. And I just remain curious about what pops up along the way. I think at one point you had asked about retreats, and retreats propel my healing, I found, and have given me a place to exercise play in community and to feel like I can do socialization, I can do community, I can do friendships, I can do groups. I am not what the old stories say I am, which is like not good in groups and da 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 da. So the retreats I've done, the spiritual retreats I've done, have been instrumental in sort of those mind-blowing aha moments that propel me forward. You know, I'm a nail nibbler. I'm always nibbling on my nails. And it was through a retreat I realized that I do that when I perceive something as conflict. And it might be something really ridiculous. Like I nibble my nails a lot when I watch movies, and I realize it's the anxiety around whatever's happening in front of me. And, you know, like little things like that, but also really big awarenesses, receiving equine therapy and recognizing, like, receiving love from a horse and the heart of a horse was one of the most profound moments of my life. Like I sobbed on my knees, sobbed as this horse was like nuzzling me. And I'm actually not sure I've ever felt loved in that way before. It was profound. It was truly, it felt like it was God. It makes me like it's choking me up just talking about it. It was Luna. It felt like God's love was just flowing right through her and into me, and I was receiving it in a way I've never felt, never in my life. So those retreats have been monumental. And this is the first year I don't have a retreat planned. So I'm like, oh, what? I do feel a little unanchored. I'm like, what's happening?
Yeah.
I don't have a retreat. So I'll just have to create my own.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to pull you to this place anyway,
Okay.
but you naturally brought up this concept of play and playing in groups. And it was something as we think about like these anchors of a spiritual practice, I wonder how many people actually consider play a spiritual practice because I know I struggle on the play bus. I really have to work at play. I feel like if I'm working too much, my dog is barking in my face to be like, we are taking a break and you're going to come play with me. Like she's
Right.
literally a totem of you stop being serious, you stop working. Now is
Right.
time to play.
Right.
And what does that phrase, like remembering how to play, mean to you at this stage of your life? Like, how has that been part of your sacred anchoring?
This is a real work in progress for me. In November of last year, I went back to England where I felt like parts of me had been lodged in a different time and space. And it was to retrieve parts of my soul. And these were the parts that knew how to play, right? And I actually had a part that didn't want to come with me initially because, like, she wasn't trusting of my ability to really play. And so I'm still leaning into this. Recently, I went to a 90s themed party hosted by the Boston Business Women's Group, and I knew two people there. The woman I went with, who was really into, I'm going to network and socialize. And I was like, "Phew, that is like outside of my comfort zone." Like at parties, I'm normally the person in the corner who is quite happily like observing all the play happening. And then this other person that was there and that I knew, I went to talk to her and met some of her friends. It was very loud, so it was hard to really engage. But I danced, and dance for me is play. And I've been getting the message from Spirit for a long time. You need to dance. And so I did, and it was really funny because one of the women who knew me there, she commented the day after and said, my friend and I really appreciated your energy when you were dancing to Nirvana. And because I was like giving it a good headbang and then really like letting it all out. And so I think like that situation would have been infinitely more uncomfortable for me, I think, before. So remembering how to play, like it's a process that we go through. And now that I've done that, I'm going to feel differently the next time I do something like that. And maybe I will network more. So sometimes the remembering how to play, I feel like sometimes I watch my children, or particularly my 6-year-old, because when she plays, it's wildly imaginative and her body just does what it wants to do. Like we went for ice cream the other day and she brought a basket to pick up rocks. And I was like, I'm pretty sure they pay for these rocks. They were nice, like Riverstone rocks. So you can't take them. But she put it on the table and someone I knew was there and they said, oh, you're picking up rocks. And she started sniffing the rock because she doesn't know that that's slightly odd. She doesn't know that those adults were judging that. She's just doing that because that feels right in her body. And so part of remembering to play, I think, is a return to our body. It's a return to this a friend of joy embodied, right? Like, how do we connect to that bodily experience and just do what feels good without fear of the judgment to the rejection or the thoughts of other people? And this is part of my life path, is to lean into that, like not stand on the sidelines observing, but rather to just do it and get in there as being part of the school of wisdom, one of the 4 paths in hand analysis. So I do use that. I use what I learned in my hand reading to lean in where it might be uncomfortable. I recently started picking up like coloring pencils and being creative. And I think the creativity is sacred, right? That's the co-creator in us. And I was very cut off from that part of myself for a very long time. And so I'm really leaning into that more now. But I will also say, as part of sort of like, I wanted to read something from the book, and it's not necessarily about play, but it is about sort of the simplicity of the spiritual, a simple, humble life structure that keeps the channel open. And play, I think, is a part of this. But this is the introduction to this transmission from Yeshua. And so Carissa writes, I have the discipline to maintain a clear, pure channel by adhering to a simple, humble life structure with lengthy daily meditations, time in prayer and solitude, a healthy diet, regular exercise, and immersion in nature. If my channel is fuzzy and diluted, it impacts the purity and quality of the transmissions. Maintaining a clear channel is an absolute necessity and responsibility I take quite seriously. And luckily, it's one that brings me joy. So play, I think, right? When we think play, we think a certain way, but like for her, play might be taking a walk with her dog in nature. For me, it's dancing. For me, like I love playing with my oracle cards, but I'm learning how to do it in community and with people. And so, like, I have this new friend who's open to different opportunities for play and is also leaning into this part because I think a lot of us struggle with this. And so I feel safe to her to recommend. I could be like, okay, we could do this or this or this or this. And I do some research. But she's really great with her boundaries because she has said a couple of times, like, you know what? I'm just feeling like walking. Okay, we can do that too. We can do that too. So I think there's no one way to look at play, and the remembering is right. Again, it's the unfolding. It's sort of like, oh, this feels playful. I like this. This gives me joy. And that play doesn't have to be scheduled. That play and that joy is like an undercurrent that can be there always and just simply tapped into. It's not something I think we necessarily have to seek as much as remember, like we talked about. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I was getting the image. I got full body chills as you were talking about just coming back into the body, right? Like play can be as simple as coming back into the body. I was just remembering being on a walk the other day, and then there was two little girls leaving school, and it was clearly like she was the little sister, and she was on one of those bikes that don't have pedals, like your feet are the pedals.
Yeah.
And she was just squealing with delight. And it was this moment of like, that is pure joy right there. Like it's just being like presence at its finest and just being in the joy of what she was doing in the moment. And she had the biggest smile on her face and just squealing with laughter. It brought me joy to see that kind of joy. And I think that's it. It can be contagious too, right? Just being in the present moment with what someone else's experience can help you feel more playful and joyful too. So I love what you said there. Wrapping up, what I would love to end on is a blend of two questions. If you could go back and whisper something to the version of you who was lost, what would you say? What would you say to someone who might feel too far gone to get back to themselves?
So if I had whispered something to myself, which would have been helpful, there's nothing wrong with you, I wouldn't have believed it. So I think about something I actually learned from Eckhart Tolle. I saw him live in Boston. I struggle listening to his book sometimes, like his voice, like I have to rewind a lot. But seeing him live was really helpful. And he shared something that just stayed with me. And I think in the moments I've been really lost, those have been really like profoundly challenging, suffering times. And without sort of a sense of where the light is, right? Just a disorientation. And he shared this Latin phrase, spera ad astra. In Latin, it means, well, the translation is through suffering to the stars or through the thorns to the stars. And I think in my most lost moments, that would have been helpful because it would have helped me understand in that moment that there was purpose to this, that there was a reason for that lostness. And we have to experience the opposite to understand, right? To know what joy is, we have to know what suffering is. Otherwise, we can't know what joy is. It stands alone. That's the reason for duality. We know that grief is that's really about love, right? Like at its core, it's about love lost, some sort of love lost. And I talk about the tether to my soul. Like when I was lost, like understanding that tether is still there and that I will find it and that this lostness is instrumental in some way. For somebody that says they're too far gone, fiddlesticks, nonsense. As the Brits would say, rubbish. No, I wouldn't be that invalidating, but I would want them to know like that this reminds me of recovery, addiction recovery. One day at a time, ODAT, ODAAT, right? One day at a time, one step at a time, 1% different, right? Like I would ask them the question, like, what gives you joy? What in your life gives you joy? And are you doing enough of that? Like, what would you do differently right now if you could? What would you do differently? What would you invite into your life that was different, that would make you feel more joy or more fulfilled? And maybe it's like, I would read more. Okay, so how much are you reading? Okay, so what if you just start with like a paragraph or a page of a book a day? It's the small actions, right? We talked about those. But it's the intention, right? Because I can almost hear that person who's like, I'm too far gone. Well, I would do this, but I was like, no, but. Right. So it's about our language, and it's about choosing just something small but different. Okay, so you're really stressed. Like, how about you just remember to take a breath, like when you wake up in the morning, and that one breath becomes something else. I think about Atomic Habits. He talks about, I forget his name, James something. It's an easy book to find. He talks about 1% better every day. I don't care for the word better because it feels like a judgment, but 1% different. Like, what if you were one habit away from that heart-to-heart connection with your soul? Because you are one habit away. It could be just getting 30 more minutes of sleep, or drinking an extra glass of water a day, or not having that ice cream late at night because the sugar's not good for your body. So that one habit away, if you can, right? Because if you're going to do a cross-country journey, you're not going to be like, well, gosh, on foot, I have to get from here to California. You're going to be like, no, I'm just going to go as far as my feet can take me in this particular day. So it has to be bite-sized pieces, and having compassion with yourself when you don't feel like it. I don't feel like that habit. Okay.
It's like that meme, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time?
Yes, exactly.
One bite at a time. I love this conversation, Dom. Thank you so much for sharing all of this profound information, and just share with the audience how they can get in touch with you and the things about your business you're really excited to share with others.
Sure. So the parts of my business that I share with others are the hand analysis, which is really exciting work. So looking at life purpose, life lessons, life path, gift markings, challenge markings, and really bringing you hope and inspiring action. I also do distance Reiki, which is a really profound experience. So it's not only soothing and relaxing, but lots of messages come through. So it's usually a pretty profound conversation afterwards if the client chooses. And then I do herbal consultations, and that's really just beginning. If you have some chronic concerns that Western medicine has, struggled to address, and you want to consider something different, we can have a conversation and find some potential plant medicines that might help you, although they are not a replacement for speaking with a doctor. So I have to say that. And you can reach me best by email at connect at rootedlifesanctuary.com. And I think you are going to put the email in the notes. So
Yes. Thank you. We will include all of your information in the show notes and link to the different resources that you were alluding to throughout, so people have those as well. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next time. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend, or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.